and see who all is here today. So if you don't mind doing that, I appreciate it. And if you want to share something amazing that happened this week or that you're really looking forward to, please do so. I will say that I got permission to ride my horse from my physical therapist. Chris has already heard this morning because I am beyond excited, and that's always my good thing right now is I haven't ridden since July, and it's saved my mental health this week. And so today we are doing our action period call. And for those of you that have not joined us before, our action period call really is focusing on practices in the field. So this is all about what's happening in the field and not about training. So our agenda today really is just a roll call. We're going to review where we are in the event, and then we are going to do our SEL in action. We have Dr. Lang here with Lehigh University, is going to talk about trauma leadership teams. We have some of my favorite people. Larry, Rob, and Ian. I'm blanking on names today, so Ian, I apologize. I'm like having one of those days. The superintendent for Freeport School District is here.
Ian Magnus.
Thank you. I'm like, why can I not remember his last name? And then Soudertown Area School District is not able to join us, but he sent me all of his information and I'm going to present on them, and you can contact him with follow-up information. We are all the way down here in January already. We only have 5 more sessions to go. I can hardly believe that. This year is completely flying. And one thing that we're going to do today that we have not done in previous sessions, one thing we're hearing at PDE is a lot around the emotional stress of our administrators. We have been focusing all year, as you have on your intermediate units, with wellness in our school districts and with our educators. But when we're having conversations with our educational leadership teams, our superintendents and our intermediate units, what we're hearing is when we ask you what you're doing for yourself, we get lots of blank stares. And then everyone starts talking about what you're doing for your educators. So today I just want to take 2 seconds to introduce you to the Compassion Resilience Toolkit and this compass idea, which we are going to look at our next couple sessions together. And it really just presents a way of looking at wellness through an organizational and individual lens. We are going to focus on the heart today. So I added all of them here, but the heart is really about relationships. No shock that I decided to start here. But the relationships, we talk all the time about positive relationships with our students and how important they are for protective factors and resiliency. But those relationships are also hugely important to us as leaders and as individuals. We forget about the adult relationships. They are a core component of staying in a school system or any work setting, as well as developing resiliency. So we are going to pause for a second, and I am going to pop up a poll. And I want you to just think about your relationships professionally and how secure you feel in the work setting. And if throughout the day, what your dominant feeling is. We have 77% of our participants, or up to 92. So we're just going to give it 30 more seconds. I'm going to pop the poll up there. And you should all be seeing the results. I am thrilled that 77% of people responded that your professional relationships are grounded in trust. That is hugely important. For those of you that were not able to respond to yes for that, really want you to think about how you can create relationships, whether it's in your work setting or with others outside your intermediate unit, your individual area of employment, that you can have that trusting relationship. Not all of our mentoring and collegial relationships do need to happen in our direct department. We know that from research, as long as they are occurring, they do lead to wellness and our development of resiliency. And again, for the secure feeling in the workplace, we're seeing a mix there. So just anything that we can do, thinking about if you're looking through the Compassion Resilience Toolkit, there are some very specific, I know, I'm sorry, I'm distracted, but can everyone mute yourself, please? We're just getting some feedback. Thank you so much. So there are ideas specific to feeling secure in the work setting and anxiety, as well as ability to express yourself, that are in the toolkit. And I will pop the toolkit in the chat in just a minute. And then throughout the day, the dominant feeling, contentment and happiness came up as the most. So that is overall positive. I just want to remind everyone that our feelings and our security in our workplace do change as our situations change, and it is extremely important that we make sure we take care of ourselves so that we are not approaching burnout and we're able to maintain our health and well-being. So first up today, we have Dr. Lang from the Lehigh University. So I am going to mute myself and let him take over. Do you want to share your screen?
I'm good. Thank you, Dana.
Okay. I'm going to still stop sharing mine so you pop up and you can see everybody.
Okay. So long as it means that I don't have to look at myself, it's fine. Okay. Thank you for the invite, Dana. Thank you, everyone, for meeting in this important group and having a couple minutes for myself and my colleague, Dr. Karen Trinkle. We are going to just talk for a brief moment on what a trauma leadership team is and how it might be helpful in the work or sustained work and efforts of a school. And Karen is here alongside me because she's been a real instrumental partner at Easton Area School District as a director of student services there, and then now as an assistant superintendent at Southern Lehigh School District. So she's going to give some brief examples of the types of work that she did with the trauma core teams or the leadership teams, so that you have some more clear examples of how it can be done. I also just want to acknowledge that some of you are already doing the really incredible, wonderful work. And if you wouldn't mind sharing your expertise and knowledge with us, that would be really welcomed by me and Karen. We're here to share and also to learn. I can't see everyone on the screen right now, so if you do have questions, just feel free to pop them in the chat. I'll try to get to them at some point. Want to start off just by saying I'm Chris Liang. You can read that in my little box there. I'm a professor and also a department chairperson in the College of Education at Lehigh University. And I've been really fortunate and proud to be able to partner with our schools in Bethlehem Area School District, as well as Easton Area School District, and also our IUs in the area through some of our connections with Resilient Lehigh Valley and also the United Way here in the greater Lehigh Valley. So this is really a collective effort is what I'm trying to get at. A lot of people are involved and I'm just really proud of those partnerships. So let me just kind of take a step back from the trauma teams first. You all are in the work of social emotional wellness, and there's a lot of overlap and tie-in with the work that we do with trauma responsive schools. We don't do any of our work without ever talking about social emotional wellness. and the different types of systems that can either promote or impede wellness. And so we tend to focus on the family, the community, and the schools. And in our work with schools, over the past 5-6 years, we've been doing a lot of work on increasing knowledge of content, the brain science that you all are familiar with. We talk to them a lot about how race equity is tied in with this work. The more knowledge that we have of trauma and the influence that trauma has on the brain and then behavior, the more likely kids are to engage in behaviors that then teachers may encode as really disruptive or problematic, particularly for kids of color. So we do a lot of this work. We try to increase knowledge of our educator friends, and we also recognize that that can't be the only stop we make. And so, again, with the great partnerships with the IUs in our area, as well as with Resilient Lehigh Valley, we've been able to develop trauma leadership teams within schools. And some of you may already be doing this. Maybe you're using the sanctuary model. This is kind of similar to that. We are really focused on helping schools convert the new knowledge that is inspiring them to change. We're really interested in working with those schools and identifying ways that they can move forward on sustaining those efforts, on building it into their practices, into their policies, into their way of being, into their culture. And so we work with the teams. We work with the schools to identify team members, and Karen's going to talk a little bit about that. And the teams are, generally, 10 to 15 folks large, cutting across different grade levels, across different types of functional areas. And our aim is not just to deepen the knowledge, but to also model for them how things can operate. Focusing on the relationships, focusing on systems of care, creating systems of care, right? So just like Dana was doing earlier with us, a check-in. How are you all doing, right? Instead of getting right into the meat of the work. But it goes beyond just modeling, right? So we're working with the teams to practice some of the things that they're learning, identifying strengths within one another, identifying strengths in their colleagues, in their current practices, instead of just focusing on the deficits. And that's very intentional because we want them to then be able to translate that into their work with students, not just looking at their kids as deficit oriented, but seeing their kids as folks who are doing the absolute best that they can. And in some cases, and in many cases, having lots of incredible strengths to be able to capitalize on and share. So we work with those schools on identifying practices that they are doing, that they are proud of. We help them understand how to integrate those practices so that there's more sort of seamless delivery of things like Second Step or PBIS or all these number of different things that schools are doing, so that the teachers themselves can see how it's all connected. And how it can all foster responsive types of services and care. We then work with the schools to identify areas that they want to address in the next 2 to 3 years. We make it really clear to them that despite their energy and passion, none of this is going to get done overnight, that this is something that needs to get rolled out over a couple of years. And so we work with them on strategies and working with the team, and then working with their peers and colleagues. We identify topic areas that they really want to strengthen in their school districts. For some of the schools that we've worked on, they've identified teacher well-being as the primary area, and this was before pandemic. And so we support their efforts. We give the teams a lot of ownership of this. As the consultants, as the people who are coaching up the teams, we actually spend a lot of our time providing resources, but not directing and not telling the teams what to do. We are very much about the teams identifying what it is that they want to do and identifying ways that they can accomplish their goals. And that's a very intentional step. And in some cases, we have to work with the principals to have them back off a little bit so that their staff can really find their own voice. And we have some evidence of how that's been helpful as well. So I'm just going to pause there. I can go a lot deeper, but I'm really mindful of your time. So I'm going to turn the floor over to Dr. Trinkle so that she can share a little bit about what she's done with these trauma teams.
Thank you, Chris. Appreciate the time here this afternoon. Working, kind of stepping back to the beginning, we kind of took a larger perspective of how and who we would start with. So, ideally, we had an ideal circumstance to bring and work with Chris, specifically just with our administrators in the school district to kind of test some of the competencies, some of the skills, where we needed to go and what we needed to refine. And that provided us with the opportunity to really evaluate which schools were really in need of this social emotional embedded practice within their work. So we even started back and doing the ground level work from there. And started to tier out what schools needed implementation more than others, which schools were ready for implementation or this type of work, because Chris framed that out pretty well. It is a multi-year practice. And once we were able to do that, we worked strategically with the building level administrators who really identified members of their staff and faculty across all disciplines. If I'm looking at one school in particular, as an example, we had a school resource officer, we had all core content areas, we had custodial, para, special education, school psychologists, all were representatives in this core team in the development of that model. And that was guided by the initial work of training the core team. A lot of that was front loaded with trainings of Trauma 101 or Trauma 102, Science of the Brain, with those individuals to build the capacity to eventually, towards that end of that first year, build that leadership team and build capacity within those core team leaders to provide the training to their own colleagues in small groups, professional learning communities or PLC, where it was very small, very intimate, where there was a dialogue able to occur and trust and relationships be able to be built within one another as looking down the hallway as a colleague, instead of having an administrator stand in front of the room and provide that training. I think that went a very, very long way in that first year of the development of the program. And that core team is the team in your building. Those are the individuals that you're leaning on. Those are the individuals that we're all looking to champion and support this work inside and outside of the classroom, in the hallway, in the staff lounge, in the cafeteria, and all of those places that you can't control. And that took some time, but I think it was time well spent in the beginning. So I think that core team model really was the opportunity for the principal or an assistant principal to get that up off the ground a lot more seamlessly. And have the professional development be afforded at a time when there are not a lot of there's pretty much a non-negotiable professional development schedule. So that was kind of taking a look at along, not just with the social emotional concepts or the social emotional program and training, but was making sure that the time was built in to the school day or throughout the school year, that these were non-negotiables, that this was something that this core team and the administrators have identified as a need, and that's what we were doing. And that was a critical component as well. As time was spent doing that and working through some of those training models and using the core team to provide the learning opportunities to their colleagues, they were able to kind of evaluate other programs within their school and kind of take a look at all the other things that were happening. Second Step, Leader in Me, all those other integral components of a school, and identifying what was working, what wasn't working, and what things can we take to fit in so that we have a common language, a common assessment, common expectations. Because things can be very, somewhat confusing if you're trying to work through 2 or 3 different programs. This, through the core team, was never really viewed as a program. because it isn't a curriculum. It's a knowledge and awareness and relationship building and understanding. So, that was something that we impressed upon the core team immediately. There isn't something that you can open up and say, here's the scope and sequence, or here's what we should be teaching now. It was never to be viewed in that way. And I think that was a critical component as well, in leaning on that leadership team to do that. Some examples, you have strong leaders in your buildings, and that's what you obviously want. But taking that step back and allowing other individuals to really capitalize on that was a learning component for us as well. So just wanted to take a moment and just check in and see if there were any questions.
Do we have any questions, comments from the group?
I have a question. This is Christine Sanker from IU10. Have you worked towards a district leadership team at all? Or is it simply a core team at each building within the district?
Yeah, I would say that most of the work has been at the school level. I mean, Karen can certainly speak more from the district perspective, but I know at Bethlehem Area School District, they have several members in their central office who are really focused on district-wide initiatives. And so a couple of years ago, they did a mapping of everything that was going on in their entire school district that was focused on social emotional wellness, but also on trauma responsive care. So they could identify things that were happening at each of the different tiers of support. And communicate that out a little bit more effectively with their building leadership. So that was something that was done at the district, but I didn't work with the district itself.
I would say that's accurate. That vision and the mapping is something we did as well. But the mechanism for this to function and occur and be successful really happens at the building level with the team leadership there.
Can I ask you a follow-up question? You mentioned about all the different initiatives that might be going on within a building. Were there any buildings that chose to use an existing team to do this work? Or was it just, that's something, at least in our IU, we're hearing a lot, is it's the same people that get pulled.
Yeah.
And they're having a lot of those same conversations. So I was just curious about that.
Yeah, that's a great question, Christine. So I'll just give you some context. We work with Marvine Elementary School, Fountain Hill Elementary School, Donegan Elementary School, Brockle Middle School, Cheston Elementary School, Paxinosa Elementary School, and now also Easton Area Middle School. And I can give you a lot more information about each of those schools, but each school is very different. Each school approached it slightly differently. And so we didn't have like a one size fits all approach. We wanted to make sure that the school itself felt as good about the model and the approach that they were taking. And so some schools created a new team with input from Karen, right? Other schools, the principal took a really big lead in identifying folks, but in consultation with folks like Karen and myself and Karen's counterpart in BASD, like who would be good people to be on the committee. And from my perspective, we needed champions, people who were committed and understood the language and understood the approach. But we didn't necessarily turn anyone away who was more on the fence. In fact, we thought that was a strength of teams, because then they could ask us the really tough questions and also communicate out to other folks in the school who were also on the fence. We didn't necessarily want folks, though, who were completely opposed to any idea that social emotional wellness or that trauma was real, right? Like we want to stay away from those folks. And that, in fact, was a big point for the teams. Like, you can't change everyone's mind, but you really want to focus on the middle. And identify and create more champions. Now, one of the schools, or two of the schools that we met with, one school was like, no, we don't want to create a new team. We'll use the leaders of these existing teams to form this trauma team. That was a little bit more challenging because they didn't see themselves as the trauma team, right? Now, and also in that building, the leader really took a huge role in it, which was amazing and wonderful, and I think helped to catalyze a lot of change in that school. The challenge in that approach is that when it becomes very centered on one individual, there's a sort of a diffusion of responsibility for everyone else. So we really wanted to make sure that everyone was kind of bought into this and everyone felt like they had a stake and a leadership role. In fact, we had to tell one principal that we worked with, scale back a little bit. You have wonderful ideas and you're really passionate and it's so clear, but you got to let the other voices emerge. And this year, that principal's like, wow, we're seeing the benefits of that, right? But this one other school that we worked with, they used an existing team that was focused on something that was very similar. And they ended up focusing on the trauma pieces along with some of the other work that they were doing. So to answer your, Christine, there isn't like a one size fits all approach, but the one thing that's really important is that the group forms and creates an identity and a mission focused on trauma responsive care.
I love the fact that you've really been integrating a lot of things that we've been talking about for learning environments, and you've been really responsive to your teams. I know that we have to move on to our next team, which is going to be hard because we could listen to you for an hour. And I know when Ian and Larry come on, we could listen to them for an hour too. Would you mind putting your contact information if there were follow-up questions? Oh, you already did. Okay.
There you go. Yeah, happy to respond to questions. It might take me 72 hours at this point. I will get to it. And again, if you have any ideas, please let me know. And I think I saw Jim McDonald on here. So hello, Jim. Anyway, take care, folks.
Thank you
for
so
giving us some
much.
time.
Really
Okay.
appreciate it. I am going to transition over to Freeport Area School District. I feel extremely lucky to have them on our call today. I am biased, I will say that. I think that they are fabulous. They've been doing work around mental health for many years and really have integrated social emotional learning into their work. And so I'm thrilled that they were able to take time out today. I know they will be sharing their screen. We have Ian Magnus on, who is the superintendent, and Larry Robb, who is the program director. And I'm going to stop talking and turn it over to them.
First of all, how the hell am I supposed to follow up Dr. Lang? How's that possible?
You're going to follow him very well, Ian. It'll be fine.
I don't think that's fair at all. Anyway.
Blame that on Larry. I asked if you guys needed to go first, and he said, no, you were fine.
Well, thank you, Dana. And trust me, I'm feeling like Dana just had a lack of better options for inviting us because we don't think we feel what we're doing is, we feel it's super important, but we learn all the time from everybody else and steal from everybody else. So you might see things, many of you on this screen that I know very well, including you, Ms. Molnar-Main, Dr. Molnar-Main, in our many years working together. But a little history before I introduce Larry, and Mr. Robb is going to go into further detail with our 5-slide presentation here, just to summarize things and the connection of SEL into college and career readiness, among other employability skills, among other things. So we're doing our very best, as I hope you can tell, to not design things in proverbial silos. So we're making sure that these skills that we focus on for kids in SEL programming, particularly at the middle school and the high school, also translate and transfer over to what we're doing in college and career readiness as an example. Just like many of you, we're in small organizations, small district, very small district, 1,850 students on average. Larry and I basically make up our central administration. So we do a lot of work together. And really our passion around this came pre-pandemic, post-Parkland. Parkland was what that, and in addition to our PAYS data around that particular year that scared the crap out of us, especially around kids, not just suicidal ideation, but actually the number that scared us were the ones that said they actually attempted. because we didn't know about any of them. So that got us to be really proactive, I think, and we did a lot of shopping around, a lot of investigating, and a lot of looking at options to find more support for our kids. And then what we ended up deciding to do in order to add more counseling and take away the barriers of access for our families and our parents, and the time spent on paperwork and billing to insurance and everything else, we just ended up adding our own full-time LPC. And actually this past year, one of our counselors just got certified as an LPC. So we moved her out of her office to be our second full-time LPC. And I would remind you, this is in a district of 1,800 students, and their caseloads, which are all tier 3 and, you know, tier 3 plus on fire, tier 3, 2 full-time LPC and their caseloads are full. So that, on top of what you're going to hear about today, we're still making those efforts to make those connections, especially among those kids in tier 3, as we try to ratchet them back through the tiers 2 and ultimately back to 1, to still ensure that they're going to be successful when they exit us, not just in controlling their own emotions and controlling those things that they've struggled with in the past for whatever reason, but will allow them to access success when they leave us, and hopefully before they leave us, obviously. So that's a little bit of background on some built-in supports that we have here. I will tell you, we're fighting the same battles that you are. A little bit of context. I'm going to have to fight like crazy to maintain those LPCs this year as we work through this budget process and the struggle with, obviously, ESSER ART monies out there. We're using a little bit of that to help us offset, but that's one-time money, as you all are aware. So we are planning future forward and cutting elsewhere to try to save that. And we're trying to convince other decision makers, including on our board, that this is important stuff and we're making progress. And I will tell you, not that our data has gotten exponentially better, but we are hopeful and somewhat pleased that our 17 data on pays pre-pandemic actually either stayed the same or got a little bit better. And we feel like as we lived through that pandemic and the kids took that as they were living through the pandemic, we feel really confident that we're making some inroads there. That's just one data point. We have all kinds of other things going on. Larry will talk to you a little bit about, you know, we dipped our toe a little bit into assessing all students and their needs. That's a work in progress, so we can better serve them. And practically, again, and Dana has heard this frustration from me and us locally, we're going to have to rebrand SEL, because like many of you, we were having the board meetings in which we are having other acronyms like CRT thrown around with SEL, and SEL has become somewhat of a bad word in some circles. So we're fighting that off. We're trying to educate people. So just my piece to you is, we are fighting all the same battles that you are in advocacy for kids, our children and youth. That's what it's all about, of course. And we think we do have some really, really organized, very purposeful pillars that we have going on with this. And today specifically talking about those pillars and those connections to between SEL and college and career readiness. And I have to stop calling it college and career readiness, because I think we can all agree it's just career readiness. Whether you go to college or you go here, you go there, it's career readiness. So forgive me, I have to even correct myself. So with that, I'll throw it to Mr. Rob, and I really want to take the opportunity in front of all of you to kind of lift up and applaud Mr. Rob and his advocacy for children and youth. He and I are, I think, cut from the same cloth, but he has really taken this and not just in a leadership way, but very personally in advocacy for our kids. So really, he deserves quite a bit of the credit in regards to what good things we have going on here in our district. So with that, Mr. Rob.
Well, I'd say Mr. Magnus pushes me very hard, and he is passionate about what we do. I welcome every day coming in and working with him, because he's a good leader for us. As Ian said, you know, we've looked at SEL probably strongly for the last 5 years. So not only did, as he mentioned, we added our LPCs, we also put in some, K-12 curriculum. Elementaries were using responsive classrooms. The secondary, we moved into a program called 7 Mindsets. Really put an emphasis around MTSS teams, and looking at interventions at all three tiers, what we're doing for the core, the whole way up to what we're doing on the social, emotional, mental health side with our LPCs through our SAP team. The other thing that we've been hyper focused on is career readiness and trying to give our kids multiple opportunities. And one of the things we've been studying and actually got off the ground this year are using industry recognized credentials. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with metrics learning, which the Department of Labor has adopted this school year. We actually looked at that last year and used some of the money we were going to use for teacher in the workplace and used it to purchase this program and creating these credentials for our students to get, working with our local WIB to do that. So what I'm going to focus on is how that evolved, what we're doing around metrics learning and these credentials, but how that ties into SEL. And as Ian said, we don't want to treat this as silos. You know, a lot of things we do, our school counselors initiate, and we've had a lot of good conversations with them around SEL and employability or soft skills. So we developed this pathway model with these foundational knowledge and skills. And this is probably 6 years ago. With metrics, what we're able to do is we created these three very specific credentials around those employability skills with the metrics learning. And as we were doing that and developing those, it really dawned on us that this is really SEL at the employer level. We worked with teacher in the workplace program before the pandemic with some employers, and really that's what they've been telling us. These are the skills that our kids need to have coming out. And these are really the skills we're trying to work with our kids around SEL. So they are one and the same. So we started doing a lot of, I guess, research around those two, SEL and employability or soft skills, and how do they connect. So with this specific program, we were able to develop and put it really in our, I guess, tier one. All of our 8th and 9th graders will get these programming. This is around 18 hours of classes that they do through these three credentials between our 8th and 9th grade career classes.
And Larry, not
yes.
to interrupt, I'm sorry. Can you advance that slide too so they can see what those are?
Can you see it?
We see your
What do you mean?
screen with the small ones on the side and the main one in the middle.
I'm not, you're not seeing my slide at all?
Just slide
Yeah.
one.
Yeah, we're probably seeing your the notes one, the presenter mode, rather than the actual slide if you have two screens.
Oh, all right, because I'm seeing it on mine here.
The slide with our pathways on it, Larry, is I think the one you've been speaking to.
Yeah, I was. Let me see if this will, if I do it this way, can you see it?
Yep.
Yep, thank you.
All right, because I was in play mode. All right. So you probably thought, what the heck was I talking about? So here's our pathway model that we designed. We actually used a lot of the in-demand occupations in Western Pennsylvania to develop this. And then, as I mentioned, the foundational knowledge skills. So on the left-hand side are the three credentials that we developed with metrics. Again, and if you know, and I'm going to jump to this slide, and I'll jump back and forth. We really use CASEL. If you guys are familiar with CASEL, with what we're trying to do around SEL. And this slide, this graphic here is with this OCTAE, which I actually use as the foundational piece for our teacher in the workplace program. And putting them side to side, I think it's obvious that how these two really interconnect. So I did some investigation into the CASEL website during the summer. And this is a really nice graphic I wanted to share with you in trying to compare these two with the social emotional competencies and then the social emotional skills at the employees at the employee level. And again, I think they dovetail onto each other. So one of our goals this year and as we develop getting out of these silos is really trying to get a common language around social emotional learning and employability skills because they're one and the same. So that's really been our emphasis. We actually have a counselors meeting on Thursday, and we're going to do some additional research around these two components. So I think it's self-evident once you look at it. But I don't know if you have any questions on what we're trying to do. The two resource that we use a lot, this is from the Castle, and this is that employability skill framework for all educators, which is a very nice resource that we've used multiple times with our teachers.
So I do have the PowerPoint that will be shared. It'll be uploaded into the SAS community with those resources on there. Does anyone have any questions for Ian or Larry?
Dana, if I could, there's only two things I wanted to add, and Larry spoke a little bit to the part that Department of Labor has taken quite a bit of interest in our use of metrics learning in particular, which we got onto them. It's a New York company. Fortune 500 companies use them, as well as our local WIB, and we've used them to be like the stamp of approval. So it means something to our employers in our region that kids have these credentials. Our next step would possibly be to work into the next tier of credentials where our local community college would then articulate them and even accredit them, giving credit for them. And all of our kids are going to be going through this. So we're really going to build this out, hopefully big time and over time. So the support from Department of Labor has been very interesting. It's actually been somewhat rewarding to work with them because we haven't really worked with anybody outside of, those various levels of PDE. So it's been good to have that connection with Department of Labor and see that side of the proverbial world. So we're very interested in that. And again, we're up against all the same things that you guys are, and we learn a lot from all of you, and we just appreciate the opportunity to share. And then hopefully we have more good news moving forward. Larry, you have anything else to add?
I don't think.
Well, as this team can see, I did not invite you guys to talk just because I was desperate. You are doing amazing things in Freeport, and I am really excited to continue to watch your progress. And I believe I can speak for both of you to say if the team has any questions after you see the PowerPoint or as you follow up. Ian and Larry have always been so open to sharing their progress, the work they're doing, and answering questions, and just amazing state team players.
Yeah, just on the mental health MTSS side, we've adopted BH Works, which Dana, when we went through COIN, you hooked us up with that. A little slower process than I wanted, but we've used them to develop an online system to track tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 SAP. All of our LPCs use that to develop their treatment plans. Our SAP plans are in there. Our tier 2 intervention plans will all be in there. So it's one-stop shop. Currently, before that, we were all over the place with Google Docs and this team and that team. And it is something that will follow the kids the whole way through. So that is where our universal screeners are coming from, that we're going to be using. That is not, we've targeted universal screening, so it's not universal. Our goal is to move into that maybe the second half of the year or the beginning of next year to do the universal screeners, but it has a ton of behavioral health screeners too around anxiety, depression, or suicide protocols all in this system now. So it's going to be a really good system, what we're doing around especially our tier 2 and tier 3 interventions. That came out of COIN. I wanted to let you know that was it's been a lot of work to get it going, but Charles Austin has worked with us very closely to kind of design it from the ground up.
Yeah, I think one of the things I love about, I know it doesn't always move fast enough for the two of you are definitely go-getters, but you always take a systematic approach and you analyze it moving forward. And although it can be frustrating to do the baby steps to the big rewards, you're both very good at doing that, and stakeholder engagement is important. So I would say lessons learned out of Freeport would include those. I'm really just having that stakeholder engagement and making sure that you are investigating the little steps moving forward to look for the big rewards at the end rather than jumping straight in without data.
And Dana, real quick, there's a little side note to all of this, not just in career readiness, but also on the, mental health and support side of things. We just started preparing today for our RVAT assessment. For those of you who are safety people in IUs or in districts, that's obviously your risk and vulnerability assessment. They now have 3 teams across the Commonwealth among PSP. Used to have to wait for as many as 18 months. but we're going through that at the end of February. And I just started filling out some of the requests. And interestingly enough, a very, very significant section of that assessment, as well as, your lighting assessment and your security cameras, hardening your site and all that other stuff. But they finally put a huge section in there around mental health and mental health supports and demonstrating the proactive pieces that you have in place as a part of that, what has historically been just a hardening of the site assessment. So that could not come at a better time for us, because then now I'm going to take that credit that we're getting for doing all those things to my board to say, before you think about having us cut X or Y, you better consider how that allowed us to pass this with flying colors. So just a side note for those of you in the field, practitioners, whatever, going through dealing with PSP, they're great. But I found it very, very interesting that a lot more of their checklist now from compared to when I went through it previously in other buildings and other districts, there is, and thankfully they're getting it, a demonstration. You must demonstrate what you're doing around mental health supports and supports for students. So I found that both encouraging and also helpful in our advocacy. So just a side note.
Thank you. And then for our last few minutes, Dan is not able to be here, but Dan is a wellness coordinator and the wellness teacher for West Broad Street Elementary. And so I met Dan when there was a trauma and physical education summit at Ron's IU. I'm going to forget what IU that is, but I was so impressed with the work that Dan had been doing. And so I wanted to be able to present that to you, to really think about how do we integrate wellness into everyday practices in our curriculum. I'm going to present some of Dan's information. His contact information is on the screen. He is open to being contacted with any questions, but is teaching right now. So I'm going to open his Google Doc for a second and let you hear from him for just a second.
On what, why, and how language to ensure meaningful, purposeful instruction in these lessons. I'm also trying to teach through an emotional lens so I can direct student attention to specific SEL capacities and show that learning is an emotional experience. That's hopefully a pretty good.
So that was just a snippet for, not for you guys, it was actually for a teacher, back to school night, but I pulled it from his Google Drive because I thought it explained exactly what he's trying to do. So these are some snippets from the wellness curriculum, which they actually publish on their website. They publish all of their information to look through. They really break everything down into standards and align it with curriculum. So they've done a really good job with aligning SEL in physical education to reading standards and math standards as well, and tying everything together. One of the things that Dan really talks about as important is focusing on how do we teach the skills. So it's not just presenting it, but how do we teach it? So rather than assuming that students understand what it means to be happy, what it means to be sad, what it means to be angry, those are the words that get used in vocabulary lessons in physical education, which is called wellness in this district. And it is focused on, the wellness curriculum is focused on that, directly taught, and then they integrate it through everything they do throughout the school building. This is his at a glance wellness for K-2. So you can see that they actually have different areas, and the blue and red look at health and then SEL. And so about once a cycle, they hit a direct SEL lesson and then tie it into the activity, because of course, these are elementary kids in physical education. They want to be running around and doing things. So they take a little bit of time to directly teach the skills, and then they tie it into the the physical aspect of the classroom. And then the other thing I really wanted to highlight in some of the work he has done, I could literally just share like pictures of every single thing in his Google folder. He is fabulous. We've actually shared his work with the National Center for School Mental Health, who shared it with some other states as well, obviously with his permission. But these are two things. The mood meter he actually has used instead of zones of regulation. Really talks about what your mood looks like, what does it feel like, what does it feel like to be in red, yellow, blue, or green, how do I know that? And then the little thing on the side is individual check-ins. So they check in, and he has his own check-in, which you can see is on the board here. He moves it around depending on what's happening in the classroom. So if they're having a great time in wellness that day and he's feeling great, he moves it to that and then uses his metacognitive strategies out loud to express why he's feeling that way. The same if he has to move it into not feeling so great. And rather than a judgment on what is going well or not, he has this, the sides are lined with these toolboxes. So the emotional learning toolboxes line the side of his mood meter, so that if a student is in a zone where they need to do something in order to engage in a coping skill, they can pick one of the toolboxes icons off and go do that. It provides a visual way of asking for coping skills without needing to interact with him as the teacher, and it lets him know that that student needs additional support. So I just wanted to be able to present that to you today and talk about some things that were just being done overall throughout the state. We know that integrating SEL into everyday practices can be a difficult lift for some schools and teams, but it is possible. And in our focus on networking and sharing, I wanted to be able to give you several opportunities to think about that. Does anyone have any additional questions as we finish up today? Okay, I am gonna pop up your ending poll. And then I am going to say that, of course, I appreciate every single one of you. Please just answer the poll before you leave me today. And I remind you that if you need anything, the Office for Safe Schools is here for you. We appreciate everything that you do. And we will talk to you soon.
Is 5 the highest or the lowest?
5 is the highest, but I will clarify that moving forward. Thank you.